Welcome. Tonight we're going to discuss the recent election, both the local, the state, and the national. To do that, we have two esteemed gentlemen from this county with us, former Justice of the Supreme Court of Kentucky, a member of each house of the Kentucky legislature for many years, and my law partner Bobby Richardson, who was also in the legislature and some years ago and was the Speaker of the House. First, I'll direct this to whichever one of you can answer it. Does anybody know about the percentage of turnout locally?
There was about 62% of the registered voters who turned out locally, about a percentage less than in 1996.
Now, it was also, and not the first time, but the Republicans, as far as the presidential election was concerned, carried the county. When they had carried it before, was it ever as large a majority as this time?
I don't believe so. I believe this percentage-wise at least was about as large a vote as a Republican candidate for president has carried Barron County. Is that true?
I think that's correct. I think this is Bush carried over Gore. And that's surprising in one sense and not in another, because Vice President Gore is from across the state boundary line over in Tennessee and represented Tennessee for many years in the House and the Senate and in the nation as Vice President. So he was a person well known to Kentuckians. But maybe that's why Bush did carry the election.
You anticipate me. Why did Bush do so well in Barron County?
Well, I think there are two or three reasons that he did. First of all, the tobacco issue, I think, was a factor. I have determined, however, in my experience, that people don't vote tobacco issues like we think they do. For instance, there was never a United States senator who was any more valuable to the tobacco program than D. Huddleston, but yet he was defeated quite handily in tobacco counties over an issue about the Panama Canal. So I'm not sure that was as big a factor as one might think. I do think that the gun issue was a substantial factor in Barron County. I had several people to mention that to me. I had one man to call me and want me to help him recover some guns before the election, because if Gore was elected, the state would confiscate them. I think that issue was out there. And then I think that Gore was perceived as more liberal than Bush, and Barron County has a rather conservative attitude toward national politics. I think those three factors were the reasons.
Do you think the abortion issue had anything to do with it?
Well, I'm not so sure. I suppose that it did. But the fact, as far as I'm concerned, the president has very little to do with that issue. The partial birth abortion issue was probably one that the president does have something to do with, could have had something to do with, and Gore, I believe, said that he would veto a bill that prohibited partial birth abortions. And that probably had an impact too.
I think there was another factor, and it's interesting because it's contradictory almost. Had President Clinton been on the ballot this time, I believe he would have been elected. But I think at the same time, a substantial number of the voters are just repelled by some of the ethical practices of the president and the embarrassment that has come to him and through him as our president to the entire nation. And I think they wanted to remedy that. And if they voted for Gore, who had stood by him throughout the whole process, proclaimed his belief in the president's truthfulness, they could not have achieved that. And so I think that's why Governor Bush corralled a lot of votes.
Well, why didn't Bush get more votes nationwide then than Gore if your theory holds water?
Good question.
Well, we'll never know.
That's an issue we'll get into here shortly. But I remember when I first came to Barron County many years ago, you had a very, very strong Democratic organization. In the last few years, I have not seen what I consider to be a strong Democratic organization. I think the Republicans have a stronger organization in the county now than the Democrats. Is there any explanation for that, Bobby?
Well, I don't know that I agree with your hypothesis, but I do think that the Democratic organization is not as strong as it once was, but I really think that a lot of that is because people aren't as interested in politics as they once were, and I also think that the conservative type voter is much more adamant in his position than the more moderate voter, and as a result takes a bigger interest in politics other than voting. I think that's you know, when I was growing up, we were in a country store there at 88. The topic from October to November, and back then we had August primaries, and July and August was the election, and we had precinct speakings, and all the candidates went to every precinct. That kind of interest in politics is no longer exists, and I think that it's a big part of it is simply the fact that the moderate kind of voter is just not interested in politics anymore.
Well, I think in terms of Kentucky and drill on down to Barron County, I think the Democratic organization was destroyed during the governorship of John Young Brown Jr. and has never since that time been what it was, say, in the era of Julian Carroll and Wendell Ford. Secondly, I think television has changed the whole impetus of politics. When I was a young boy growing up in Adair County, we went to the courthouse because we wanted to see the candidate. We wanted to hear the candidate. I remember my father and I would sit at the big old floor model Philco radio, and we would listen to Senator John Sherman Cooper give a 30-minute radio address. Well, nowadays, nobody would sit for 30 minutes to hear anybody. And when
Especially not us tonight.
and
Well,
when,
one reason I raised the issue, and it was sort of brought home to me, the difference in the type of organizations. It used to be that a Democrat precinct worker or somebody for him or her always contacted me about voting and being sure to get out and vote and so forth. Didn't have any of that in this election, didn't have any of that in the last election. However, and this is the reason I inquire about the change and the reasons, I've had Republicans this time and the last time asking me to vote. And
they may not have known you well.
Well, My wife say I'm too hard-headed for them to change me anyhow, so they were just wasting the time whichever side it was. Let's talk a little bit about Jefferson County. Of course, the big issue up there, two big issues, first was merger, and the other, I think, was also a big issue, was the race for representative in the House of Representatives in Washington. First, the merger. Why did it carry? After all the reports and what I saw in the paper and so forth in the beginning, they didn't think it was going to carry, that the black vote in the West End would defeat it.
Well, you had a united bipartisan support for the merger. Senator Mitch McConnell, with whatever clout he has, which is, I think, is major in Jefferson County. Former Mayor Abramson, who had been mayor for life of Louisville. The county judge, David Armstrong, the present mayor, David Armstrong, the county judge, Rebecca Jackson, all were supportive of merger. And it is an idea whose time has come. Louisville was faced with the prospect, and I think this made a significant difference, of winding up not as the first largest city in Kentucky, but the second largest city. And I don't think they wanted to surrender that primacy that they've always had. Lexington, which is an urban government and includes the entire county of Fayette, would have been larger than the city of Louisville as presently constituted would be.
Well, I think that was the major factor in what changed the trend in Louisville. I think you could see as soon as that issue became pretty well known, you could see a change up there. And another factor is that they watered down the merger substantially. You know, there are more cities in Jefferson County than probably there are in any 10 or 15 other counties in Kentucky. There are subdivisions in Louisville that are incorporated as cities, and those people have been very protective of their rights to have their own mayor and city councils and so forth, and they allowed under this the retention of all those cities and all of their departments and the fire departments and police departments that they had. They were allowed to keep those, and it was watered down substantially to what the issue had been, say, 5 years ago when they had it up before.
The results, what effect, if any, will it have on the state as a whole? Politically or otherwise, economically or politically?
Well, I think not necessarily politically and economically. When you have one person who speaks for the entire government of basically of Louisville and Jefferson County, that person speaks with a much stronger voice. There will be one political leader to deal with when you're talking about economic development for the Louisville, Jefferson County area, or when you're talking about any issue affecting that area. And I think that has to be for the better.
Well, it's yet to be seen what impact it will have on their economy, but it's bound to provide a much more efficient kind of government and save tax monies. I think that that's readily apparent, but whether it has any impact on their politics is yet to be seen, and I don't foresee a great deal.
Of course, you can compare it with what's happened in Lexington and Fayette County. Economically, I think that helped Fayette County. I'm inclined to agree with you. I don't think it affected politics a great deal, if any.
I don't think in terms of Democrat and Republican,
that's what I'm
it'll make
about.
one iota of a difference.
Now, the race between Jordan and Northrop. What was the principal factor in deciding that race? I'll start with you, Walter, since you've got relatives and in-laws in Jefferson County and friends, and you probably know more than...
I think one significant thing that hurt Representative Jordan was her performance on this interview show on WHAS radio, which was picked up by the Northrop campaign and converted into an ad that made her look silly. And a second thing, which was a TV ad, was a film clip of her speaking on the floor of the Kentucky House, being very frustrated, looking at her watch, saying, "I've got a fundraiser to go to, let's get this over with." A certain degree of impatience that Bobby and I both, I'm sure, have had many times over as members of the House and the Senate. But it did not look good, and did not look like a person who ought to be representing you in the Congress of the United States. And so I think that hurt a lot. Additionally, I think, and fairly so, Representative Jordan was perceived as a very liberal individual. And while that may have been very attractive in the west end of Louisville, and again to certain segments of the east end, I think overall it was not a plus factor.
But Jordan didn't run as well in the west end as was predicted.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with Senator Baker that those two TV ads had a very definite impact on that race. The question that was asked to Eleanor Jordan that I recall was what she thought ought to be done about the high gasoline prices. And she said, "Well, I don't have any idea." Probably an honest answer, and probably more true than any that one could have given, but it was perceived very badly. But I thought that the TV ad which showed her on the House floor in a very strident voice saying, "Let's get this over with, I've got a fundraiser," and looking at her watch while she was doing it was very damaging. And as a matter of fact, there have been times that I would have liked to have said, I wouldn't have had a fundraiser, but I would have liked to have said, "Let's get it over with and quit enjoying it to death." I was a little like Senator Doug Mosley said one day after somebody had talked for about an hour on an issue, and Senator Mosley was a Methodist preacher. He said, "I've never read the Bible all my life and read about Samson slaying the Philistines with the jawbone of an ass, but this is the first time I really understood it." So I know we know how she felt.
Do either of you think that race had any factor in that race?
Well, yesterday's Courier-Journal, the article by Al Cross on the forum or editorial page attributed part of the loss to race, but he also attributed it to the liberal aspect of race. I wasn't there and wasn't involved in it enough to be able to make a statement about it, but you know, when there's a black and a white running, there's usually always some racial overtones to a race, and I don't at this point in our history, it's hard not to have racial overtones.
And assuming that it was there, I think it cut both ways. I'm not sure that it made a major difference in the totality of the outcome.
I served in the legislature with Ann Northrop. She's a good friend of mine, and she is not quite as conservative as she's gotten credit for in this race either, in my opinion. she's more moderate than she was portrayed. She's got good judgment. I don't know Eleanor Jordan as well as I do Ann, but I do know that Ann Northrup has pretty good instincts.
And a little known factor in that election, Ann Northrup has, I think, 2 Afro-American children that she's adopted.
Yes, and I don't think that was generally known. A little bit in the paper about it now and then, but I don't think that was generally known. But maybe that has something to do with the turnout for Jordan being less in the black community of the West End than they were expecting. I had read that too, Walter, and I think maybe that could very well have had some influence. Let's go to what I think was a very vital issue in Kentucky, and that is annual sessions of the legislature, which were approved in this last election. What effect is it going to have, Bobby?
Well, I'm not sure what effect it's going to have this early on. Obviously, and I was asked this question one day this week, does it mean that the legislature has more power vis-a-vis the governor? And I'm not so sure that it took power away from the governor, but it did give the legislature more power. And obviously, if they're going to be there every year, they're going to have the legislature is going to have a little more impact on the government. So it may balance out the power a bit more. Since the governor can be reelected, we have thought maybe the balance of power shifted back to the governor. I assume that we will now have an annual budget. If we do have an annual budget, that does take away some discretion from the governor as far as when funds are to be allocated, whether he holds them back or moves them forward, and they can manipulate that if they wish to. And we won't have to go as long to deal with some issues about administrative regulations. But otherwise, I doubt that it has the significant impact that the proponents were advocating for it.
There's a negative impact that it potentially brings, and that is, given the demands of the office today, which are far more demanding when I first went to the legislature in 1968, and the demands on the time of the occupants of the offices, it's going to be increasingly difficult to have a citizen legislature. You're almost by necessity going to have people who can devote themselves full-time to being members of the General Assembly. And this means either they are retired, they are independently wealthy, or they not only want the office, but they need the office. It's their livelihood. And particularly on the last group, that's a very dangerous group to have around, because when you look at each vote with the viewpoint, will this get me back or will this send me home, then I think you're taking the wrong view on how you ought to vote as a member of the General Assembly.
What's the difference in that attitude, or what would be the difference in that attitude in Kentucky than what it already is in Washington?
Well, it's bad in Washington.
Well, I agree with Walter about that, and I'll be frank, I don't mind to say that I did not vote for it, and I at one time was a great advocate of annual sessions of the legislature, but time and experience changed my mind about it. You know, we've got professional legislators in Washington, and I I've often said Washington is an island surrounded by reality. And if we get people who serve in the legislature that's basically their only job, it's going to defeat the purpose of a citizen legislature. I think people ought to have to come back and work, live, send their children to school, and deal with the same problems that the citizens do, and have to live under the same penalties of the law, the burden of the law that the people do. When you're in Frankfurt and don't have to work at necessary employment, I think it's bad.
I remember when the federal Congress would adjourn at the end of June, and they were only in session 6 months a year. And gradually they extended the term and so forth, and now for many years it's been
about 13 months a year.
That's right.
And the thing you describe is you go back to the 1950s, and that was still existent.
Right.
And
I follow what both of you are saying, and I feel that's what's going to happen here in Kentucky. Not next year or 2 years or 3 years from now, but I believe you're finally going to have the legislature in session most of the year with professional politicians as members.
You know, even now, the Congress can't get a budget done within the year. They can't. They have continuing resolutions, and we run their. They hadn't got the budget done 6 months into the new fiscal year. And I'm going to make another point. And maybe I'm taking up too much time.
No, you're not taking up too much
but
time.
When I was Speaker of the House the last term, 1984, we were having a problem in Frankfurt. Every interim committee had 2 subcommittees, and our expenses were going out the roof, and I got to looking to see what the trouble was. Well, for instance, we would have a meeting of the Judiciary Committee on Wednesday. On Tuesday, there would be a meeting of one of the subcommittees. The legislators would come in on Tuesday. They'd get paid for that. They'd stay there Tuesday night. They'd have a meeting on Wednesday, and then the next subcommittee would meet on Thursday. So they were getting paid $100 a day back then, plus their lodging and their meals. And I put a stop to that, and I said the committee would meet at 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock. One of the committees would meet at 10, the other one would meet at 12, and the committee would meet at 2. I got a lot of criticism and lost a lot of votes for Speaker as a result of that, but I did what I thought was right, and I still think it was right. It ought not to be a place where you go to make your living and get your meals paid for.
With control of the Senate, the Kentucky Senate, now in the hands of the Republicans, will there be more or less cooperation now that the election is over? And I think that the last session that there was too much devoted by each party to being sure that they held or lost, that the Republicans held or lost the Senate. Now that we've got a fact that was decided by the people and not by certain people changing parties, is that going to help the situation any insofar as cooperation is concerned?
Well, I think part of the problem of the 2000 legislature and the interim coming in 1999 existed from the fact that the Republicans had never held the leadership in the Senate, ever, since 1792. And there are growing pains in learning how to operate the government, just like there are in many other endeavors. nor, for that matter, had the Democrats ever operated as a member of the minority in the Senate. And I think there were problems that existed there. So that was not a very cheerful situation for anybody. I think the real danger we have is that the type of mutual destruction that took place between the governor and Senator David Williams prior to the November election, when what each one said about the other was something that did not enhance the respect for government by anybody. And hopefully we can get over that type of cheap shots at each other. And it seems from what I've seen reported more recently that they're talking to each other in a more positive way and trying to find ways of working together. But that was a very unhealthy scenario that we went through in October.
Senator Baker, I know you're right on your issues about the Republicans never control the state Senate, but I believe if you will check in 1920, there were 20 Democrats and 18 Republicans, and that the Republicans persuaded one of the Democrats to vote with them, and they tied the Senate, and there was a Republican lieutenant governor, and the Republicans organized the Senate in 1920.
Well, there was a Republican lieutenant governor. It was Senator Thurston Morton's grandfather.
Yes, Governor Ballard.
And this was under Governor Ed P. Morrow of Somerset.
But I believe that happened. The reason I happen to know that is my great uncle J.H. Branstetter was a member of the Senate that year. Back to your question, Uhel. It's a lot easier to be against something than it is to have to make the train run. And Senator Williams had been a very, very efficient, loyal opposition. But the burden devolved upon him to make the train run. And he didn't have any experience in making the train run. He didn't have any experience in any kind of compromise of views. You know, we send 38 people, we've got 38 views, and one view can't be, one man's view is not going to be the one that prevails every time. And hopefully, Senator Williams, who's a friend of mine and a bright man, has learned, and he'll be able to compromise. And Governor Patton is a very astute man, but he was fooled. He thought because David Williams had voted for him, or said he had voted for him, that he would go along with his program. And he didn't build the bridge that it took to get across the river. So I bet they've both learned, and if they either are successful, they're going to have to cooperate.
I hope so. I have read recently that Abramson is now going to be the kingpin of the Democratic Party in Kentucky. Not right now, but in the rather immediate future. And of course, I don't think there's much doubt that Mitch McConnell is, as far as the Republicans are concerned. Bobby, do you think that that's probable?
No, I don't. And I'll tell you why I don't think it's probable. I know Mayor Abramson well. When I was Majority Leader of the House and Speaker, he was Governor Brown's one of his closest advisors, special counsels. And some of my good friends in Louisville are his closest political advisors. And Mayor Abramson's had the chance, in my opinion, to be the United States Congressman from Louisville. Had he run for that this time, he would have been elected. I think he's had the chance to have the gubernatorial nomination. I think he's had the chance to have the United States senatorial nomination, both of which would have allowed him to run some good races. Probably would have won. He's been offered just sub-cabinet level in the Clinton administration, and he didn't take any of those opportunities because he doesn't want to leave Louisville. Could hardly get him to spend, he's about like the fellow that was governor of New York, couldn't hardly get him to spend the night out of Louisville. So by not taking those opportunities, I think it's pretty obvious he's not going to lead the Kentucky Democratic Party, but I will make one prediction. He will be the mayor of Louisville and Jefferson County as soon as he can be elected.
Any comments, Walter?
Well, I tend to agree with you. I think he was a very dynamic mayor during the period that he headed up the city of Louisville. He also was president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and spent a few nights outside Louisville, Bobby, on that. And I think he's just as popular in Louisville today as he was when he was mayor, and he most likely be elected.
Now let's go to the national mess. I don't know where to start with the mess, and it is a mess. I think both of you would agree. I guess the first issue, should the Electoral College be abolished in favor of the most popular vote?
Let the conservative senator go first.
Well, I say no. If you have simply a popular election with nothing else, then the interests of many of us across this nation are not going to get tended to in any way. The presidential candidates are going to fly across Kentucky. They're not going to come as George Bush did to Paducah, to Hopkinsville, to Bowling Green, to Louisville, to Lexington, to Covington. And there will be a tendency for third parties to candidates to become a wedge in the political process, and I just think it's very, very dangerous. And the candidates are going to cater to where the votes are, and that's New York, California, and in Texas and Florida. Kentucky's not going to be a very large star in that firmament.
Well, I agree with Senator Baker that we ought not to do away with the Electoral College, but I don't necessarily agree with him with his reasons. You know, I really think that it would make a place like Kentucky get more play. You know, we've got 9 votes out of 571, so that makes it that's not very many, but my vote counts, if it's a popular vote, counts the same as anybody, the man's in California's does. And the closeness of this election indicates to me that they couldn't overlook anywhere with a popular vote. But on the other hand, I think one of the strengths of our country has been the two-party system. If you look at a lot of the European countries, where they have to have coalition governments, there's a splintering of political parties, and I think the Electoral College goes against having minor parties, and I think that's good, and that's why I support the Electoral College. And that was one of the things that Senator Baker mentioned, of course, but that has a much more impact with me than any other issue.
How are the electors elected?
The presidential electors.
Yes.
Right. Each political party, pursuant to its own rules, chooses the electors that will be for the Democratic Party or for the Republican Party. Then the voters vote for the candidate, George W. Bush or Albert Gore, and whichever one carries the state, then that party's electors that the party has chosen, and they're usually extremely partisan individuals who've been very loyal to their party day in and day out, election in and election out, and they're given the honor of being a presidential elector. They go to the Capitol in December, and
Which capital?
Pardon? Our capital, Kentucky, Frankfort. The
There's
Constitution.
some confusion about that. I've had people asking, all those people going up to Washington.
No, the Constitution provides they shall go to the state capitol, and there they assemble and cast their ballot. And then it's tallied and sealed and sent to the President of the Senate in Washington.
By a certain date.
You know, Darrell Harvey, Dr. Harvey was an elector one time from this county. And I believe it was in the 1960 election that he was an elector. He voted, I'm sure he voted for Nixon, knowing Darrell. But, you know, one of the...
Probably thought he was too liberal.
One of the things about the electors is that the Constitution of the United States does not require that those people vote for the person who carried the county, the state rather.
You anticipated my next question.
They are representatives. They are elected by the people of their state, and they can exercise their judgment, and it happens periodically. I remember a few years ago, it was one of the years that a Democratic candidate didn't win, and I'm not sure what year it was. Could have been at Stevenson in '56. One of the electors voted that was supposed to be for him, voted for Harry Byrd of Virginia. It's not unheard of for that to happen. And I heard one of the electors, it reported that one of the electors this time from one of the states, maybe you heard this, Walter, and can add to it, said, that was committed to Bush, said that they might vote for Gore because Gore had gotten the most popular votes. If that were to happen, it would put this country in a tailspin.
Now, some states have penalties for electors not carrying out what the vote was in their state. Though I don't recall anyone ever being indicted or penalized for bolting, and of course there have not been that many bolters down through the years. But you know, I saw something interesting in one of the news magazines this week. One of the presidents who was elected and did not have a majority vote was John Quincy Adams in 1824. Jackson carried the election, but it was a 3 or 4-way race. Henry Clay of Kentucky was one of the candidates. He threw his support in the House of Representatives to John Quincy Adams, who then was elected president by the House, and Adams appointed Clay as his Secretary of State, and thus began the corrupt bargain charge that hovered over Clay's head the remainder of his life.
Clay denied that, and Adams did too. I tend to believe Adams.
Oh, boy.
I think it was in play that he said he would rather be right than be president, and someone said he was neither.
Well, it has happened several times. By that I mean 2 or 3 times where the president didn't get the majority of the popular vote. Grover Cleveland is one example of that.
Well, there's been a lot of occasions where they didn't get the majority of the popular vote. They got the plurality.
Bill Clinton didn't get a majority either.
No, he didn't get, but he got the plurality.
And Abraham Lincoln didn't. He just had a plurality.
But there are also, and Grover Cleveland's one of them, where they had a plurality of the popular vote, but lost the election in the Electoral College.
They stole the race from Samuel Tilden in 1876 that way, too.
Well, the Congress set up a special commission of 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats, and interestingly enough, they voted along party lines.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
But there were a lot of fundamental changes affected in this country in getting to that point. The Republicans agreed to withdraw the Army from the South, and a number of things that were part of that compromise.
Isn't it interesting that every one of those fellows that got to be president, by winning the electoral vote but not winning the popular vote, served only 1 term? These gentlemen ought to take that into account.
But it's getting hard, even though Clinton did it, and Reagan did it, and Eisenhower did it. It's getting hard for a president to win a 2nd term. The economy goes sour on you. Any number of things can happen, and you don't. The rose wilts, and the 2nd time around, the people want to find another rose.
Now let's talk about a little while, not too long, about the Florida mess, and then maybe we'll go into something else as far as the national election and the nation is concerned. If you had a similar situation in Kentucky, what would be the law?
Well, I don't see how we could have such a mess in Kentucky. We've got voting machines. I understand, and I didn't know this, but I understand that Louisville still has some similar type voting machines that they're using in Florida. You know, we got voting machines in Berrien County in 1960, mechanical voting machines, and have had them ever since. But I've been in a few election contests. We've got, the first thing is a recanvass, where you go back and make sure that the vote that was recorded on paper and turned into the county court clerk is what's shown on the machine. Then we do have a recount, and I found out during the course of an election contest that I had that there is also a tape inside the machine which can be taken out and read by another reader other than the one in the machine to determine if the vote is correctly read. It's a magnetic tape, and that's a recount. And that's all we can do. We don't have anything to count by hand. We don't have any ballots, paper ballots.
You did have the paper ballot, of course, years ago, and you did count them by hand. And I observed several of those before we got the voting machines. And you had representatives of each party present, as well as member or the members of the election commission. And it's, from what I read and hear, it's very similar to that in Florida insofar as the counting is concerned.
That's the way we count absentees
Yeah,
that are cast by paper ballot still.
that's right. Now, there's been a big issue down there as to whether or not that means of counting could be correct, and also whether or not it is subject to corruption. Either one of you care to comment on that?
The paper ballot,
Yeah,
yes, it can be subject to corruption quite easily. If you've got,
but do you think that we had any errors in Kentucky when we were counting the same way paper ballots years ago?
well, I think we had some outright thievery in Kentucky under that system.
Yeah, but that was thievery in marking the ballots and so forth, and then not counting them. The thievery in getting both. I remember when I was a youngster living on the Ohio River, when you had, and this was before the days of registration. You had an election in Kentucky. They'd go across the river and bring some Hoosiers over and vote them in Kentucky. And then when they had an election in Indiana, they repaid them and take Kentuckians over there and vote them.
And over in East Kentucky, they would load them up on trucks and carry them from precinct to precinct to precinct and vote and vote and vote and vote.
That's how William S. Taylor won that race for governor in 1899.
I think you could still get an argument about that.
Well, I was trying to.
Well, I once
He didn't
heard,
take the bait. I'm a little bit surprised.
I once heard a member of the United States Senate from Kentucky say that in an election that he was involved in, that the vote was not what it was necessary, and there was a call made to a county, and I won't identify the county, and that county then called in an amended return, and it increased his vote by a significant number and left his opponent's vote identical to what it had been earlier. Now, I won't say where that county was.
Well, but back to your question, Uhel. I really don't think that that is subject to corruption in the sense that the votes are not going to be counted correctly. Now, there may be some dispute as to what is a marked or not a marked ballot, as I understand that, but there are too many people, too many honorable people, too many people of different political faiths, too many observers watching that and looking at each ballot in order for, it would take a conspiracy of every person there in order to corrupt that outcome. Now, there may be a dispute about whether that Chad, if I believe is what they call it, is a 1, 2, or a 3-pointer, or a pregnant, or whatever the descriptive term they use for the various status of the vote. But I'll be satisfied with the result of the count myself.
One of the issues has been, though, is whether or not it's fair the way they are counting them and whether or not it's accurate. That's one of the issues, as I understand it, was before the Supreme Court today. That was one of them, and possibly another issue was construction of conflicting statutes, apparently. And then another issue involved the matter of discretion. And as one of the courts, you know, has already ruled that one of the lower courts, that Secretary of State could use discretion. In essence, they were saying she had to check the count, but could use discretion in determining whether it was proper or not. Now, my question, legally speaking, how much discretion does a judge or somebody like that have? How do you determine whether it has the discretion has been abused.
Well, you have to have some standard by which you judge discretion.
And what is the usual standard?
That there's a substantial basis for the conduct of the decision maker.
Well, whether or not whether or not there is a substantial basis that a reasonable man would consider to be unreasonable, or also that the wrong law has been applied. That can be a part of it too, as I understand it. But nobody can predict how the court Supreme Court of Florida is going to act on that matter. Another question, though, if they decide, however they decide, should that end this? You know, there's a possibility, and the Republicans, according to the news I saw tonight, are talking about federal question. Should the Florida decision end this business, or should we go on again? And if so, when are you going to get a president?
Well, I tend to think that whatever is done in Florida ought to end it. And whichever one, Governor Bush, Vice President Gore, is behind coming out of Florida, that individual ought to step forward, concede the election, and this nation go on. Otherwise, I think we're going to have a division that will plague us for many years down the road and will not be beneficial to the nation.
Well, I agree. When the courts of Florida, the highest court, says that this is the answer, this is the law as we're enunciating it, that then that ought to be the end of it. And whichever one of them is ahead or behind needs to say, now I'm a big enough man to give this up and let us go on.
Well, and I think if he doesn't, he's committed public, he has cut his throat. Excuse me, go
Well,
ahead.
it looks like tonight, this is Monday night, November 20th, and this program may be seen several nights, and the court will have ruled, and the count may have been completed in Florida, and then we'll know. But at least tonight, it would appear that even if the count continues, Bush is likely to emerge the victor in Florida, unless trends that are developed so far are just cease to continue.
We're just going to have to wait and see. I think the country is anxious about it. I think that the general feeling, and talking to people here in this county, and it's actually my feeling too, I'm tired of hearing about it. And I think that's sort of the general feeling of the public.
I was tired of hearing about it before the election. I got worn out with it before Tuesday 2 weeks ago.
Well, I'm sorry we're not going to have a bit more time, because I wanted to talk a little bit, or let you all talk a little bit about the national issues, the fact that both candidates were talking about a budget surplus, that there was no way in the world any reasonable man could determine that there was going to be a surplus. And another thing that impressed me in this election was the lack of attention on the part of both of them to foreign affairs. Thank each of you very much for coming. I appreciate it.